Thank you very much for that introduction. That was a little bit of a stitch up about getting more money, but that is one of the reasons I'm here today. I am really glad to be able to spend the day here today. My experience in working with the Brahman breed and Brahman producers is definitely a passionate one, as Matthew alluded to in his introduction this morning too. But also I found that as a group, you're also really interested in ways to continuously improve and how to keep meeting those market specifications. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. But so my intent today was to share with you, just go back to, you referred to the levies there. So just to up front and remembering how MLA is the recipient of your cattle levy, and most of it anyway. Some of it goes to Animal Health Australia, some goes to the National Residue Survey. And then our responsibility is to go and invest that in wise decisions, in wise investments in the areas of marketing here and around the world, and also in research that is to benefit producers ultimately in productivity benefits and profitability benefits. So whilst we get the levy as a vehicle to invest, one of our biggest funders is actually the Commonwealth Government, who actually make money available, a percentage of the value of our industry available to also go and invest in R&D. And so that really helps bolster the amount of the funding that we can do with your levy. So we can double your research part of your levy with that Commonwealth money, but there's actually a lot of money left over that the Commonwealth makes available that we're allowed to go and invest in R&D when we have a commercial partner. So we don't use levies in a lot of our R&D. We work with commercial partners. So those partners could be universities or state governments or processors or producers directly who'd like to put forward their own money, and we can match that and do research, development and adoption activities. So some of the information I was going to share with you today was really, I've picked out, I like to share with you an update on some of the big ticket items that MLA is going to invest in, increase our resourcing towards, because they're things that the industry has told us through some consultation last year, probably about 12 months ago now, as we were building up to our new MLA plan to 2030. What are the big ticket items that would really shift the dial for producers? And so through that consultation around the country, I'd like to share with you what some of those things are, but I've put a northern nuance on some of these things too to demonstrate alignment to the feedback we've been getting from the northern beef industry. The way we get that information for the northern beef industry is primarily through NABRAC, so the regional committees around North Australia that feed up the priorities that are opportunities or constraints to productivity, and if we can answer that with a research question or some adoption activities. Just keep going. I'll remember my slides as in my head, and I'll just keep talking so we can keep fast tracking through them when they come up. So what I did first and foremost to get context as to the influence that you have on the beef industry is we have recently done a beef producers intention survey, where it gives us a bit of a handle on the demographics of the herd, how people are generally feeling about the beef industry. Thank you. And this is me. And so out of that, when we ask producers, tell us about the composition of your herd, 8% of producers are telling us that, sorry, I'll just go to the next one. Here we go. 8% of producers are telling us that their herd is made up of Brahmans. Okay, so that seems like quite a modest figure, but when that really understates the actual influence of the Brahman breed, because when we ask producers, tell us about the breeders in your breeding herd, the Brahmans then have a 20% influence on Australia's breeding herd there. So what I guess the key message that comes out for me here is that when Brahmans do better, you're actually lifting the whole beef industry because of the significant influence that you have over the industry as well. And so I think I just wanted to get, that was great context for myself in some recent data that we've been getting, and just some of the things that may put some context around the rest of my slides. So before we jump into what can actually happen on farm and what could we do from a research on farm or adoption on farm, I'm actually going to start with the consumer. And as Matthew said, most of my time in MLA has been working with the Meat Standards Australia program, essentially from the moment it started. And so first and foremost in that program, we put the consumer in the middle of the room and say, tell us about, well, in that case, eating quality, but more broadly, until we understand what someone values about our beef around the world, it's really hard to know how to market that beef and tap into those consumers here and around the world that are willing to reward us for what we produce, and what are the credentials they're looking for when they're purchasing beef, and what's the driver behind them choosing Australian beef over another competitor's beef, or even choosing beef over a different protein. So one big part of MLA is about what we're doing to invest in our marketing activities. And so here in Australia, it's about having campaigns, marketing campaigns. Aussie Beef the Greatest is the one we've been running with a couple of years here now in Australia. And really, you mostly see that in metro areas because that's where the consumers are. And so we do our advertising activities there. But the Aussie Beef logo is what is marketed in our countries around the world, and it's really, really highly recognised in every one of those countries that we have got Aussie beef on the shelves. Now, my talk today is really going to be about the box beef trade, and so it's been really great to have the live export discussion just before that. Actually, and Mick Crowley, our Managing Director, is in Southeast Asia at the moment doing a live export, spending a couple of weeks looking at our live export markets as well. The other thing we do here with marketing domestically is we work with the big users of red meat and look at where could we shift, displace, if you like, another protein off a menu and replace it with beef. And so Subway is an example where we work with these big users of meat and see if we can come up with some product innovations and how they might be able to incorporate that into nation scale projects. The other thing we've got happening around the world, I mean, we heard from Ethan set us up really nicely with some scene setting around what's happening around the world and where we sit in amongst that. And we heard just then about our population of people in Indonesia. So we just don't have enough people here to eat the beef we produce. So we export so much of it. And it's such a privilege to have access to have that much, have the ability to send beef to over 100 countries around the world. And that's something you just can't take for granted, that we've got that access, which is why the fundamentals around biosecurity and livestock production insurance and your national vendor declaration, whilst at times they may feel a bit onerous, but they absolutely underpin the ability for us to have that access. And so we have 11 different offices around the world, and the job of those offices is around creating that business awareness of Australian credentials, generate business development opportunities, but also around market access. So whilst we don't get involved in any political activity around negotiating access, we absolutely provide the information to those having negotiations on why Australia should be in the box seat to get that access. And a great example recently of how that's come to fruition in the last couple of years has been the free trade agreement with the UK that has just absolutely opened up over the next 10 years, so much access to that market. And that means now we go into developing long-term relationships in that market and really consolidate our position in that market. As Ethan alluded to before, so much products leaving our shores, and the US is really I was going to say trumped, but that was not a good choice of words. It's actually come over the last couple of years, has been ahead of all the other markets. So the US, Ethan's covered it well. There's lots of attention being paid to how we supply into that market. And we were just about to resource Canada as well. We haven't had someone we've got an office in Washington. We haven't had a person dedicated to Canada, and we'll be doing that shortly, recognising the opportunity that while the US may not be in that market, we'll get in there and can consolidate our position on shelf there too. So when thinking about, we are a big exporter, but in the whole scheme of things, we're a small producer actually in global scale. So it would be very tempting to go, well, we should go and put our meat where the people are. And so let's chase population, because there's a lot of commentary around, and true, how there's a protein deficit around the world. And so we could look at a graph like this or a picture like this and go, okay, well, China's got 4 times the amount of people as the UK and Europe. We'll go there with all our product. However, that's probably not the greatest marketing strategy, putting eggs all in one basket, because from an Australian beef production perspective, we actually are one of the highest cost beef producers with one of the highest cost beef products on the shelf. So it's really about, let's go and find the consumers who have the option to choose. So the consumers that have a disposable income, we think the trigger is around about 35,000 US household income is the trigger for that is converting, that's actually people that have got the option to choose Australian beef over something else or make the decision to move out of a lower cost protein and actually choose beef. And so that looks a little different then. Still, the China and all those markets are still there, but the emphasis on those is a little bit different, and that certainly informs our marketing strategy for where we go and find those opportunities. This is really, really recent data I only got access to yesterday, was to think about, well, what do these consumers around the world think about our product? What's driving their behaviours? That also then informs how we need to go and market the product. And we've done a lot of how people around the world use Australian beef and what's their attitude towards it. And we can see that users' consumption of beef is actually highest in the younger age groups globally, and sort of decreases. We get skews in ethnicity of how they use that, but how they use beef. But we can also see as household income increases, they're more willing to put beef in their shopping trolley more frequently each week. Now, some of the data here in Australia, we've done consumer tracking in Australia for 15 years, so it's a really reliable data set that has shown us some trends over the years as why consumers, in particular, there's so many insights we've got access to, but the things I've picked out is what's making people eat more beef or eat less beef. And when we know that, we can go and really chase that and use that signal to what is it that we've got to do back through the supply chain and have the evidence to demonstrate to consumers what we do. Now, in the last survey just finished last year, what we saw was that, actually this is for the first time ever in the 15 years, we actually saw consumption turn around. There has been a declining beef consumption, but we saw this turn around in that for the first time, there were more consumers saying they're eating beef more often than those that were reducing it. And you can see the reason that they are saying they are eating beef more often. It's all health related. Now, protein is such a trendy thing at the moment as you're shopping, everything's got protein called out on it. Red meat, that's absolutely our time to shine because we are such a dense piece of nutrition and can really hit the mark as far as a rich protein source. And so even those that tell us they've been vegetarian and have come back to red meat, it's been driven by a health message. So the message around our marketing campaign here in Australia of Aussie beef the greatest has got a lot of nutrition messages around it, knowing that that's what's converting people back to eating more beef. Now, when it's about if you told us that you're consuming less beef less often, why is that? And you can see there's a massive gap in between cost of living pressures really coming to the top versus anything else. So yeah, there are some people there that are reducing their beef consumption because of health concerns or maybe sustainability or animal welfare. So they're there in the peripheral, but largely it's about driven by costs. But that just shouldn't stop us because we know that 80% of the value that's coming out of a carcass is largely coming from about 20% of the carcass. So let's stop, in addition to the prime steaks that we see on shelf, what we can do is think about how do we get better carcass utilisation by looking at other cuts that are maybe a cheaper or a more affordable option but can do the job just as well under certain cooking methods. And that's where a system like the MSA program kicks in and finds the right fit for purpose for every single cut in that carcass and allows people to have options on different tiers of affordability. We know that when we have trust in consumers, so this is Australian data again, but would be relevant around the world, when we have trust from consumers, that translates to increasing their consumption. So this is putting it on a trust factor, but there's an index about trust that we get lots of information on. But it translates through, I trust more about the industry, I therefore eat more. So what's incredibly important is that trust isn't just a marketing slogan, it's got to be data and evidence behind it. And that's where MLA also looks to help to make sure that to build the trust from consumers. What is it that we should be telling them about and backing it up with data and evidence? And so these are some examples of our Osgood Meet platform that is all about community communications. And there probably might be producers here in the room that are featured in some of the videos that we have that are about communicating our story, not in a defensive way, but with facts and footage that shows that we do a great job about animal welfare and looking after the land and so on, and also nutrition messages too. So now I'm just going to move on from the consumer and what the consumer's telling us, a few things there. And when we think about trust, and their trust expectations going forward, what's the R&D and work that MLA is doing to help feed into that? And so when I'm talking about some of these big ticket items that industry said would make a difference, one of those is about how we're going to continue to contribute to Australia's net zero ambitions. Now, back in 2017, we launched with industry about the target of becoming carbon neutral by 2030, and we've learned a lot since then. What had to come along with us on that journey was changes in policy and so on, but what we learned is maybe that wasn't the most realistic goal, and so therefore the goal of becoming carbon neutral 2030 has changed. But our intent on R&D perspective has not. The intent is to be able to provide producers with measurement tools and options and choices that if this forms part of your supply chain requirements of being able to demonstrate how you might be reducing emissions or your environmental sustainability credentials, that we're going to have tools and technologies to help with that. So some examples here are that we've been investing ever since thinking about our responsibilities here is in genetics. So right at the start, and genetics has been a really big investment in this area, is to know, could you actually use genetics to reduce net emissions coming out of an animal? I'll show you some information in just a moment. But that data has been collected over a long time, and we're now very close to being able to release breeding values that are about methane directly. We've also been investing in different feed additives and dissolvable boluses that have low release technologies to reduce emissions actually coming out of the animal. And so we've been doing a lot of that in the feedlot sector, and we've got confidence you actually can do that. And so now we start expanding, thinking about how do you solve this challenge in the grazing sector. That is a whole new challenge that is somewhat unique to Australia in a way, given the variability we have in the country. But to balance that off about having net zero ambitions is how do we better understand how to improve soil health and improve soil carbon storage, and making that a really cost-effective way to measure that and what strategies to do that. Now, surrounding all that is how do we provide the calculators or the tools to collect this information and help producers along the way. Now, this all sounds great. So if you do a practice, if you do decide that, I'm going to start reducing methane emissions through using additives or breeding values, right now, at the moment, there's actually not a methodology you could use to turn that into a carbon credit. However, you probably may have seen in the media in the last couple of weeks, we've been asked by the government to lead with industry come up with the methodology that allows for producers to monetise. If they choose to make a practice change along these lines, can actually monetise it into either a carbon credit, insetting, and with a supply chain, and so on. So all of that's hopefully happening in parallel as well. So when thinking about I know these are sheep, we're at a Brahman conference, but you just stick with me because the information is larger, the results are largely the same, in that if you were to select on low methane emissions directly, would that compromise things like quality, eating quality, or performance? Now, message is also still clear here, like on any genetics, we would not be advocating for single trait selection at all. This would be part of a broader selection. But when we've actually, this is the sheep data, the beef data looks the same. But when you look at animals, you look at their methane production, but this is against lean meat yield. And so it doesn't really matter what the figures say there. The point is there's a lot of variation. There's dots everywhere. That's actually a really good thing from a genetic perspective, in that actually gives us the ability to put selection pressure on the things that we want. So there are animals there that can reduce methane but also have high lean meat yield. If we look at it from methane and intramuscular fat as a quality driver, you can also select those things and get them both. So you can get a win-win. And shear force as a proxy for tenderness, also get that too. So it's just some examples of that we can do it, and there will be options, I guess, if producers wanted to go down that track. Because I think MLA first and foremost wants to be productivity driven. So looking at not just reducing emissions for the sake of reducing emissions, but doing it through a productivity lens. Let's get productivity, and efficiency here is one of the biggest levers. So how do we become more productive and have sustainable benefits along the way? So we won't be looking to do R&D in things that just reduce emissions at the price or at the cost of reducing productivity. That's not what we're interested in. We're looking for those win-wins. And so we recognise sustainability is more than environment. It's about whole farm business sustainability. And so some of the things for the northern industry we've heard are constraints, and therefore we've got R&D in, is things around, so our northern MB2, which you might have heard of, our northern breeding business looking at what are some grazing management strategies, nutritional strategies, how do we boost weaning rates and calf survival. So that's a really producer-led initiative where producer groups are coming together, benchmarking with each other, identifying what's holding them back, and then we put some programs of work around that. Looking at income diversification around, in here we've got silver pastoral activities happening. I want to move on to specifically genetics because it's a real credit to the northern beef industry and the Brahman Association that have been investing in what's called the Repronomics Project or Northern Multi-Breed Project for the last 10 plus years. And this is where we've had Drought Masters, Brahmans and Santa Gertrudis running head-to-head for the last 10 years. And in the last couple of years, we've started to bring some, as Matthew you referred to before, some Herefords have come in, some Angus genetics as well. And now we have a data set of these breeds running head-to-head for a long time that's now allowing us to then pull together a multi-breed genetic evaluation. So we're thinking about a lot of mixed herds in the north, producers having certain objectives they want to achieve from a productivity perspective, putting the tools in the hands of producers to be able to compare apples with apples. Now, this is not about replacing breed societies. It's not about replacing direct breed EBVs, but it is about expanding that opportunity for commercial producers to be able to look across all breeds and make a decision that best suits their environment. Now, the Repronomics Project's been a great partnership with the Queensland Department of Ag for a long time, but the great thing that the breed societies in Brahmans and Droughties and Santas have come over the top of is, well, if we're going to do all the collect traits around reproduction and fertility and productivity and growth and all of those things on farm, let's make sure that we collect the meat off those animals and those steers coming out of those animals, and so we understand meat quality traits as well. So this is a mega database. We believe that probably in the next 12 months we'll be in a position that the tropical multi-breed evaluation will be ready to commercialise. And the southern counterpart of that with the temperate breeds is probably just a couple of years behind. But we've got Brahman genetics linked into those cattle as well. The other part of genetics here, where I know we'll talk a little bit about eating quality a little bit later in today in the panel, so I want to sort of just start to get some thoughts happening there, is through collecting this data, we'd really like to investigate and go down the track of how could you actually create an eating quality EBV. So at the moment we have breeding values around certain traits that tell us about quality, whether it's intramuscular fat and so on, shear force. But if we could get a breeding value that's directly related to the consumer sensory outcome, that actually could be incredibly informative and could actually, if we have then genomics products that overlay that, potentially become part of our grading system down the track. Now, something you'll hear MLA talk about quite a lot is about going in the next couple of years is value-based marketing. Now, that's not a new term. You've probably all heard it before, but we're going to put some real concerted efforts around how can we support industry and supply chains to unlock true value-based marketing or value-based pricing, however that may look. But what we mean by that is those market signals I've started out with is how do we translate what a consumer or a customer is willing to pay for, have that as a signal that can travel through the supply chain to reward producers for those that can actually deliver a product that meets that customer requirement. And so we see some processor grids already have that built into them, largely around eating quality or maybe some particular customer requirements. But what's changed in the last few years is there are now some technologies that allow us to expand beyond that. So we've had investments in R&D and technology for the last 20 years to work out ways to objectively measure true traits that truly reflect carcass value. So we've got a system with MSA that's mature on eating quality, but how do we also add lean meat yield to that? How do we objectively measure what health status that animal is in through looking at maybe it's the disease and defects that might come through on their offals. But these technologies are now nearly ready for commercial adoption. And when we couple those things together and provide a data set that truly explains the whole carcass value of that animal, it's data that's been collected objectively, which you can actually base a really confident decision around. And that will allow us, the idea is to unlock that opportunity for supply chains to give good data back to producers and maybe accompanied by a different pricing signal as well. And right back through to breeders. One thing we haven't been able to do, even though we've been able to give carcass feedback on eating quality for a long time, we haven't, if you weren't the last owner, but if you were the breeder but not the last owner, you may not have been able to see how your animals performed until now. So the My Feedback system is now enabling breeders to see how their animals down the path have performed. I just wanted to, recognising time, just a couple of quick slides as it might help feed into discussion later on this afternoon, is a lot of the conversations I've had in the north around, well, how does value-based marketing fit in with the northern beef industry, or how do Brahmins fit into MSA? And there's now, I'm so confident to stand here and say there are so many wins with high tropical breed content cattle for MSA, and we've got so much data to back this up now. Over 4 million animals are graded every year with MSA, and so what we've done is pulled out a subset of that data. If we just use hump height as an indicator of tropical breed content or Bos Indicus content, in the 4 million carcasses graded last year, there was over 100,000 of those animals with a hump height of 130 mils or more. And when we looked at, well, if we looked at an MSA index of 53 above or below, which is reflective of some northern processor grids as to what we considered fits into their specs or not, is there's two big drivers that may not be new news to you, that those that are hitting the mark of 53 index or above, it's about marbling and it's about growth. And so this is an example, and when I say marbling, it's not about having high Wagyu type marbling. The pictures on the far is what I'm talking about as far as a change in marbling. The animals that had less than 53 and greater than 53, there wasn't much different. If all things were the same, there's less than 100 MSA marbling points in that. And that's the difference between here and here. It really is nothing, and something that genetics can absolutely be influencing. Then if I go to growth, what I mean by that is about either optimising the ossification of those animals or turning those animals off at the same weight at a younger age, essentially, or it's a weight for age sort of maturity score. And again, it's not a big difference, but it's all these small additives, if you like, these 1%ers that are actually getting animals across the line and having really big wins in MSA and getting what's now pretty common, a price premium. One thing I did wanted to let you know is new news is that we actually did some work on looking at unlocking how do you make every animal in Australia eligible for MSA, and we have the northern industry told us, well, unlocking the pathway through rail and even longer distance road transport would be incredibly valuable. So we've done the work. wasn't without its challenges. It started in 2018. We had floods that couldn't get cattle off. We had train rollovers, lots of different things that stopped us getting it finished, but we've done it. So we've had 600 cattle go through this. Nearly 7,000 consumers have sat down and eaten samples to tell us that good news is it's actually more about the management of those cattle before they get on that train rather than the mode of transport they did. So we tested trains versus trucks going all over the place to get to Brisbane at about the same time. And the great news is the train actually didn't have much of an impact on eating quality per se compared to long distance transport. It was all about the management of those animals and the condition of those animals before they even got on that train or that truck trip. So our next steps here is for us to work with supply chains that use this pathway and understand how we might implement that. So that will hopefully become a reality really soon. Now I'm just going to finish up with all of this doesn't actually happen without the people capability in the industry as well. And so while MLA can do some great R&D and great marketing, it doesn't really rubber doesn't hit the road until we have people that have the capability to implement this stuff or people that want to work in our industry. So we attack this in a few different ways. Right at school level, how do we get people loving our product and understanding what we do? How do we attract people to work in our industry and know it's a great career pathway and bring new skills into that we need for the future? Those that are already in the industry, how to equip those people to be ambassadors and be able to really confidently talk about our industry in a non-defensive way. So we're using the word social capital now, not social license. Licenses really feels I'm asking permission to do something. Capital is something you invest in, it's an asset and we build. And that's really the direction we're taking with ambassadors, that we want to make sure you've got the assets to go and tell your story. And then right through that is in all the R&D we do, we're always thinking about how do we fast track the path to adoption? How do we get producers engaged in R&D as early as possible and support them with regional advisors or coaches, if you like, that can really help bring producers together and de-risk testing out some things, new practices. And a good example of some, Brahman, probably down near Rockhampton, is doing a producer demonstration site that is looking at incorporating genetics, grazing management, different pasture mixes, how all of those soil health, how all those things can come together and measuring that versus control with other producers and testing how that can actually change productivity. And when we know that actually works, when producers do that type of work together in a real life situation, it de-risks it, but we've actually seen how that turns into true adoption and turns businesses around. So I'll finish up there, and that's just a few pictures of actually how we do this, getting producers together, measuring together, testing things together, and then implementing it at business scale when they feel confident that they've got the data to make that decision. So hopefully that's give you a bit of an insight into what MLA is really doing on your behalf and with you to really make sure that we do maintain, I should say, being the most trusted source of high quality protein around the world. So thank you, and I'm here all day and tonight, but happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Sarah's actually on part of the fireside chat, so and I do want that to be really interactive. So we might just, because it's smoko time, we're running 5 minutes late, we might just step straight into smoko because I can see some people are starving. So we'll just and I say I really like to encourage the fireside chat to be interactive and Sarah to be part of that. But I think one thing that I get out of this is the fact that a lot of the MSA stuff is always underpinned by sensory testing and consumer testing, and we were really lucky that our last lot of bin steers, we were able to get the samples off them for future. They're probably the best mob we've ever killed, 14 mil of fat, 330 kilos, and that meat will now be used as part of a sensory testing project to keep underpinning where MSA is going and is it right or wrong. Anyway, smoko time.
Great, thank you.